Operator Syndrome, episode 35. We've got Steve back. Thank goodness you don't have to hear me rambling by myself anymore. I'm happy about that too. Steve, will turn over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed, sometimes one's own voice is annoying, and so I annoy myself re-listening to the episodes. But no, it was great, and I really did enjoy it. And what a mission, man! I mean, and usually we'll get into it here in a little bit, but really incredible. I wanted to say just in advance, some housekeeping notes. We're getting feedback, and we plan to do an episode addressing some of the questions we've already gotten, and we really appreciate that. So it is our email address is operator syndrome podcast, all one word at gmail.com. Operator syndrome podcast at gmail.com. Yeah, send us your thoughts, your interests, your questions, yeah, just anything, what we could do better. So um, we'd like to hear from you. So Patrick had two episodes of a rather long operation that they did. And I have a bunch of questions as always, because and we prefaced also some of our comments and memories is these are what we remembered. I actually tried to write some of my experiences in the Gulf War years later. Gulf War was 91, and I was writing this in 99, 98, and 99. And I honestly had to call my old buddies that were in my platoon and go, what, did we do this first, or did this happen like I thought it what did? And they were like, oh, I don't know, call Tom Dietz, because he was a platoon commander. And he couldn't even remember some stuff. But I think with all of us talking, we sort of patched it together. But it just goes to show you how faulty our memories are. Also, why it's important to get stuff down when you can, when it's fresh. Journal. Everybody's story needs to be told, I think, and whether it ever gets published or not, just it's important. So
Mm-hmm.
anyhow, blah blah blah. Uh, I was out at Dev Group in 2011 doing some stuff, and I saw. I'm prefacing Patrick's episodes by saying I saw this guy. We were all dealing with funerals and memorial services, so we were all in our dress uniforms, and I saw a SEAL operator, a Dev Group operator, in his. I think he was in his whites. It was summertime, and he had a silver star with I don't even think they give you valor for that, because you have to earn it in combat.
Yeah, I think by default it's like a valorous award.
Yeah,
So yeah,
like a Medal of Honor. You don't wear a V on it
yeah,
for obvious reasons. Yeah, but for those of you who may not know, a Silver Star is up there. I mean, I think the only higher for is a Navy Cross, and then the Medal of Honor. I'm pretty sure it's way
yeah.
up.
I think that's the order. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So he had one on, and I'm like, wow, man, that's pretty impressive. I didn't know what to say, because you don't really sometimes guys just don't want to talk about it. But I was just like, whoa, because you kind of read a person's uniform, and it's kind of like their resume in a sense, for another military guy, because he can
Mm-hmm.
see that, yeah. And he mentioned back to me right away. He goes, and he brushed it off like a lot of guys do. He goes, hey, things went south, and I ended up with the medal. And I think I'd like to start with that, because we used to also always joke that you didn't want to receive the Medal of Honor, because more congressional medals of honor, I believe this is correct. At least it was, I think, when we were talking about it. More congressional medals of honor were awarded posthumously, after the person had been killed in the operation, than people who survived to receive a Medal of Honor. And a lot of guys that survived to receive the Medal of Honor were pretty messed up,
Mm-hmm.
physically and maybe other ways. But it's to say that when things go like they should go, like they should go, which is how we train, and I believe probably, and Patrick has alluded to this in Iraq and Afghanistan. I know it was this way in the Gulf War. Most of our ops go flawlessly. The way we're trained to work together, to integrate, to set up, to do a mission, it's pretty much a slam dunk most of the time. I mentioned that was the case in the Bin Laden raid, except for one helicopter getting crashing. We'll talk about that. The idea of crash. um, but other than that, nobody was hurt. I don't believe anybody was even hurt. I mean, not even a sprained ankle, and everybody got home, and mission was a complete success. So, and talking to a couple of those guys that were on that op, they were saying, yeah, it was. We've had way harder stuff when things go south, and that's what it really boils down to. So, all that to say, is an introduction. If you listen to the two previous episodes, and if you haven't, you might want to do that because we're going to be talking about those two previous episodes, which was one
Spoiler alert.
spoiler alert,
Yeah.
one long, very long mission. Usually, as we operate as SEALs, and I know it's pretty much the same with Rangers, our missions are usually in and out overnight, and we're inserted in the dark and we're extracted in the dark and we're back on the base pre-dawn, usually maybe dawnish. And that's how we like to operate, because we're not out there for extended periods of time like guys would do in the jungles of Vietnam or LERPs or something like that. We're going in direct action. We're going after a specific target, and it's usually should be in and out. Well, this got extended, Patrick's operation. It started with what we call a hard landing. So he's going in a Chinook, and I'm going to pull up a text here because I kept thinking about this. I've been in a hard landing, and the initial thing I'd like to talk about is, because I kind of take it in sequential form that Patrick told it, and the first thing was the insertion, which is coming in on two Chinooks. And by the way, before I get into the hard landing versus crash, was the initial assault party, the first one inserted, was that a tier 1 unit, or was that another Ranger?
No, this was just a Ranger strike force.
Okay.
It was just our platoon plus enablers.
Okay, I was just curious. Um, so yeah, so we were so a Chinook, a brownout had occurred because the first one had landed. And it's always easier with the first one because at least you're seeing, as you're churning up dirt, you're at least be able to see the ground better, whatever. And that group was dropped off, and then another Patrick's Chinook came in, and that Chinook, again, dejargonizing, that is a very large, it's one of our largest payload helicopters with dual rotors that are flown by some special ops helicopter squadrons, which we might mention in a bit. And it came in and just basically had a hard landing. Now that gets into the thing. What's the difference between a hard landing and a crash? And I don't know, honestly. We were inserted in the Gulf War on an island that we were securing, I guess would be the best way to say it. And we landed. It reminded me of Patrick's landing, although we didn't get anybody hurt as bad as some of those guys broke their legs, as I understand it.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that is no thank you. But we could, I mean, we could have. We hit, it was a brownout situation. There were these rolling sand berms, like dunes almost, in the helo, and we weren't flying with Task Force 160. We were flying with another very, very skilled spec ops group called First Special Ops Wing, their Air Force. And we were coming in a thing called an MH-53J Pavlo, a big, it kind of like got a comparable payload to a Chinook, but anyway, it's a special ops plane, all the bells and whistles. And man, oh no, we're getting ready to exit the plane off the back ramp, and same thing, boom, and we all went flying against the bulkhead, depending on where we were in the craft, but it was like bam, and we're just like, well, that's not supposed to happen. And and Patrick got into the nuances of, you can kind of, you hear when things are normal and you get used to that, and when you hear certain whines and you feel certain jerky pitches, and it's just like, and I'll just say too,
Yeah.
on a beautiful day back in the States, crystal blue skies like the day is today, it's great. It's fun to go on a helicopter ride when you're just going here and there. It's cool. You lift off and you see out. When it's nighttime and there's hard, the terrain is rough, and there's brownout situations. There's nothing more terrifying than being on a helicopter.
Right.
Um, and not least because many numerous helicopters have been shot down with what's called, an RPG, a rocket propelled grenade, by the enemy, and they're just they're just vulnerable when they come into land because you can't just instantly land and take right back off. It takes now the more special ops guys who are flying, like 160th and First Sal, they're the best, and they're the best of the best. They're like the Top Gun of spec ops flying, and they can get us in as fast and out as fast as anybody. But it's still, there's this vulnerable time where that thing is loud and it is just hovering. And so if you've got somebody with a rocket nearby, that's really scary because some of our at least in naval special warfare, our largest mass casualties have both been helicopter disasters,
Hmm.
shot down in such fashion. So anyway, I talked to my a buddy of mine who is a pilot, and I said I just texted him after I watched the first episode, and I because he okay, so he flew Apaches, which are AH-60 64, is it
I think
H-60?
that's right.
Yeah, they're gunships that do a lot of good for us, and we might give a Patrick acknowledged this first, and I'd just like to give a nod to all of the pilots, both the close air support, the helo pilots, that they they're they're heroes. They don't maybe get as much credit as the special operators like Rangers and team guys going in, but we couldn't do it without them. I mean, they are just the best, and bravo Zulu to all those fearless pilots and those who have been lost going in, whether it's close air support, which for us is Rangers, SEALs, direct action guys, special forces guys. It's calling in real close, sometimes danger close fire. And usually it's either coming from something like an Apache, which is a helicopter gunship, an A-10, which is a slow mover plane that's just armored to the hilt and can come in and put, and that's what came up in Patrick's operation, or usually an AC-130 gunship, which can put, and it's a bigger plane and it flies higher, but it put it ridiculously close, accurately, as long as they know where you are. So yeah, so we salute those guys and gals that are flying those planes. They're just amazing. So what's the difference between a hard landing and a crash? Because I had a hard landing. Patrick had a hard landing. But it's you're landing and you're not, and it's the plane's doing something and the pilots are trying to keep it from doing something that it does, and it ends up bad. Let's put it that way. That's a hard landing. You hit hard. These guys had broken legs. That's not supposed to happen. And it'd be interesting to, I wonder if the plane was damaged. I bet the landing gear, I don't know, it could,
I don't know. Yeah. I
yeah.
don't remember. I don't it wasn't top of mind once we got back.
Right.
So we
No.
we we let it go. We called it even. We're like, we're alive.
Yeah.
You guys do what you do. So I don't know.
Well, yeah, and that's another thing. I mean, not to digress, our plane was broken after ours 53 because we were working with these First Sal guys a lot. It was the same squadron, and we got back and debriefed and everything. And we said, "What happened to that plane?" They're like, "It's headed stateside." I think the tail, something about the tail it broke. It actually broke some of the frame of the thing. They
Mm.
flew it out of there, but they limped it out of there. Let's say that. But anyhow, so that happened. So I asked my friend Wiley Gustafson, Wiley, thank you for your service out there and my pestering you with questions. So he said, as a pilot, sometimes we cover crashes with the term hard landing. He said, by the way, there's a real semantic difference here that's pretty fine line here. Like one person's crash is another person's hard landing. Um, Possibly if I had a hard landing in a combat zone and the bad guys were coming, I would try to get it back in the air. a true crash may render it non-flyable. Like usually you can't get out of there. Now you're on E&E or you're trying to secure the crash site.
Mm-hmm.
So a crash is his distinction was a crash is where the bird cannot fly anymore.
Yeah.
And one or more people may be killed or hurt badly.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be a crash where a hard landing is one or more people may be hurt or in a minor fashion or in a major fashion, but the bird's probably able to take back off and get some distance away. And that's kind of what we arrived on. So my last thing was so it's probably a bit of semantics. My takeaway is both are unplanned and unpleasant. Hard landings means most or all live. The bird may or may not be flyable. Crashes are much more serious on all accounts. And he said that's it. So anyway, enough of that. Um, I wanted to just move on to that's not really a question. It's just kind of exploring some of the terrain that Patrick had to deal with that night. Do you
Yeah.
remember exactly how many was it? Seemed like it was something like four or maybe guys. I guess memory may fail you. How many guys couldn't go on the patrol?
Um, well, we had three or four broken ankles, sprained or broken. I can't quite remember. They carried on though. They came off the bird, had one or two broken legs, one for sure, because he ended up once he recovered, he joined my team a year later. Um, but um, but the guys who got off the bird with the sprained or broken ankles, they had to have them wrapped up and they were sort of limping along. So, when we got ambushed, that'd be an interesting story to hear from their perspective,
Yeah,
what it's like having, your leg wrapped up and then having to deal with that. So yeah, so that's what it
yeah,
was, like two broken, three or four sprained or broken ankles.
right. So we approached the target, and what happened? Long, you can listen to Patrick's longer version of it. They had what's called a squirter who headed out and was running, obviously fleeing. A squirter is just a word for somebody who runs and takes off and tries to get out of there. Usually, it's just like it kind of like analogous to a police situation where they're going into maybe apprehend somebody or a house or serve a warrant, and somebody takes off. Well, that's a pretty good indication of some sort of guilt. Um, so they went after him, and he made his way up this ridiculous, and everything over there is ridiculous from what I've heard. I've not been in country in Afghanistan. I have been into Iraq, but never Afghanistan. And I've heard it's just sick, the kind of mountains that you have to deal with. And moreover, those a lot of those fighters, Al Qaeda and Taliban, they're tough, man. They're not no, they're no slouches with their ability to fight, especially given what they have. And they're like everybody, all the guys that I've talked to, team guys in my case that worked over there said they were like mountain goats. They could
Hmm.
just scamper up and down a mountain like way faster than we could. Of course, there's factors. They know the terrain. They've lived there all their life. They're it's almost like its own skill set getting up and down that shale and that rocky stuff. But also we're carrying loads of gear. We can't move
Hmm.
as fast. There are a lot of times they've got a weapon and ammo, and that's about it. Some of them in sandals sometimes that can just fly. So there's a difference. But so Patrick and his was it a platoon? Would you say a platoon or
Yeah. Yep. It was a ranger platoon and then enablers. So
you're right, enablers. Uh Headed up right. And Patrick talked about some of vaguely what who and what those enablers were. Um Headed up this mountain to pursue this guy, and it was just how long did it take you to get to the peak to where he was in that cave?
from once the guy stopped moving, from once
Right.
they bunkered in. Oh man, that's a good question. Maybe I'm guessing here. I wouldn't say an hour to go up and then back down. So
Uh-huh.
maybe it was like 10 minutes, 10 minutes up, and then 10 minutes ish to get back down, maybe to the point
Okay.
where he was, I mean, he'd already been, the other team had already grabbed him, but yes,
Right.
maybe something like that.
Okay.
So going up was the difficulty of climbing,
Right.
basically mountain climbing, and then
Right.
going down was just being smoked and picking our
Oh,
way down, trying not to like roll down this mountain, this hill, and kill ourselves. So
right. But it took a while when you first started tracking him.
oh
It
yeah, it was all night.
Yeah,
So
all night.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Patrick was just referring to the culmination of it.
yeah, the final part, yeah.
Right. So all night, think about this. That takes a lot when you're just chasing somebody with all that gear. I mean, at least you got rid of the ladder.
Yeah,
He got,
right.
Patrick was carrying a ladder, a combat ladder to, go over walls with, and you end up not having to take that when they pursued this guy, if I understood that right.
Hmm.
But by the time, so the sun's coming up, and you've got a, what did you call it? ROD, remain over day.
Yep. Hmm.
So now you've got to pretty much you got to hole up somewhere and form a perimeter, get cover. Now was that cover in that compound you came down into, or was it up on the mountain somewhere?
Uh, well, that's where we were headed. So we were headed to, at the point where we had rolled up this guy,
Right.
and we were looking around. It's daytime. The air acids would prefer not to come and get us at
Yeah.
that point, and
Oh
we're
yeah.
like looking around, and there are only so many options for where we can stay during the day. So the compound we ultimately ended up in, anyways, was where we were intending on going there.
Right.
It's just the manner in which we had to go in there that we were surprised by. Yeah,
That's right. That just jogged me. See, I already
yeah,
forgot something I just watched a couple of days ago.
yeah.
That it was broad daylight when you got to the class. That therein lies the problem. And for
Hmm.
those, if you're not as familiar, Patrick alluded to this as well, but daylight is an enemy for us, for special operators and pilots, because we have the technology to be able to fight. It's what gives us the advantage. One advantage is that we have devices, night vision equipment, both the pilots and the operators, who it gives you a significant advantage over people who don't have that. And we I can't ever remember thinking about doing an operation during the daytime ever in a planned scenario. Like we would never plan to do it during the daytime. I don't know. Did you all ever rehearse like taking an airfield during the day or?
Well, we I think we do one when you're doing that exercise, that workup or whatever, which is a series of airfield seizures. You do like you do like 1 day iteration where you get the just hang of it, and then you go all night.
Yeah.
But I mean, daytime operations, they weren't common back then. I wouldn't go so far as to say that for rangers it's like a no-no, because ultimately we're infantrymen. So, operating during the day, having to operate during the day is something that um, we have to be expected to do, just like someone from the First Infantry Division might have to go and patrol during the day too. So we have that ability, I would say. But to your point,
Mhm.
when we're being used for night raids, that's a different skill set. It's
Right.
different, and I think what got us on this particular operation was that transition. It was the transition from doing a raid at night, and this was the first time in my career up until that point. So it'd been a while for the platoon since we'd been hoofing it around during the day. And I think that the transition from doing a night raid and capturing a guy to, okay, well,
Yeah.
guess what? Now you can feel as cool as you want, but you're just a grunt now. You're a
Yeah.
daytime grunt walking in a valley, and you need to act like it.
Yeah.
And I think also we were all smoked, so I think
Oh,
there was some complacency there, and
yeah.
the terrain was difficult to manage.
Right.
Um, I wasn't in command and control, and I'm not sharpshooting anything we did, because I think everyone was doing the best that they could.
Yeah.
But there are probably some things, if you were better rested, there might be certain things we could do. But the terrain, for instance, one thing I always think about is like Overwatch. I don't remember Overwatch necessarily, but the terrain was very difficult. Like you know, the mountains, they're basically mountains, but the height of them would be difficult to establish that, some serious Overwatch where we could cover each other. Maybe cover with close air support, but
Right.
so there were a lot of factors that ended up in us having a bad day.
Good grief. Yeah, a couple things that come to mind. Man, one is we watch too many movies. I mean, I'm guilty as charged. I love movies. I watch them all the time, and it's fun to see a cool chop 'em up, shoot 'em up movie. I call it,
Right.
but it's amazing how different real combat is. It's just there's so many factors that you would never think of, and it doesn't make for good viewing. It's kind of like why a Brazilian jiu-jitsu tournament doesn't make for sensational viewing. It's just like these guys are just holding on to each other forever. What's happening? It's like a chess game's going on, you don't realize, but it's not very spectacular. Like a lot of things in life, the real deal is not as exciting as Hollywood. But one thing is, yeah, in the daytime, for those listeners maybe not familiar with tactics, you have to, if you patrol at night, you can stay pretty close in a patrol, distance wise, from the guy in front of you, the guy behind you. In at night, at daytime, that all changes. You got to spread out because you're more a concentrated target. And there's a fine line, and like terrain comes into it and other things. You've got to be able to at least see the person and watch hand signals and stuff like that. But yeah, you got to spread out more. So tactics change. You become, like Patrick was saying, a ground pounder. And we don't mean any disrespect by saying that. It's infantry tactics, which are oftentimes patrolling in the daytime, wherever they're called to do.
I'll take it a step further. I'll if I go, I know what I did, and I know that from an individual perspective, I wasn't moving and reacting to my environment like I was walking through a valley in the middle of the day in Afghanistan.
Yeah,
Not once did I think, oh, these peaks, this high ground to either side of me could be a threat. I was walking around like it was night, and all I needed to worry about was, someone within, you know, the
right.
the reach of my rifle.
Okay.
So and close in. So yeah, it's the mindset, switching the mindset, I think, was for me definitely an issue that day.
Yeah. Another issue that came into it, and man, I could really relate to this one, is they had no water. They're out of water. And it's the little things, man. You think water, yeah, water is a huge one. We did an op one time, and it was a training op. We didn't take enough water, and we were in the desert of California, and it was roasting during the day. It cooled off at night. And I mean, we were down to such critically low levels of water. We were thinking about, the word came up, are we going to need to go admin and have the training department bring us water? Because we were like we were dehydrated, and we were like right on the border of, I guess it would be heat exhaustion, because that also has to do with dehydration. But we were also dealing with serious heat. Was that a hot day? Because,
Yeah, it got warm. Yeah, it
uh,
was cool in the evening
mhm,
because I was wearing like special, tops, sort of cold weather tops.
that's right.
And then yeah, once the sun came up, it started to get warm.
If you've ever, those listening, if you've ever been in a desert area, or and I've heard of this in areas of Afghanistan, it was the same way in Saudi Arabia. Depending on the time of year, it can be really chilly at night. I mean, shivering chilly, and then it can be roasting in the daytime. And it's just the swing. And it's like that in the Imperial Valley Desert and the Mojave Desert in California. Same kind of thing. And that's one of the first things, if you've ever lived in an area like Kentucky, you can't really relate to the shifts of temperature as much. But depending on where you are, it can be freezing cold in Afghanistan with snow on the ground, depending on where you are, to roasting hot. uh, Same deal. Yeah, water, man. Gosh. And you mentioned a Casa. Yeah, I think it's a Casa 212. We jumped out of those at Fort Bragg, believe it or not. They're flown by civilians. They're let's just call them contractors. They
Right.
do all kinds of interesting stuff and they appear out of nowhere. You're like, who are you? And they're in their jeans and flight jackets with a Spyderco knife and cool boots. You're like, huh. And my
One thing I didn't say about that, let me get it in really quickly, is I was told afterward, right,
mhm.
from someone who heard from someone else and all that. So this is like after the mission, but that the load master on that bird was shot in the leg during this.
No
And
kidding.
I don't know, and the rumor mill after a mission, like that, it can get crazy, but that's what we heard. So
Just all around craziness.
yeah.
Uh you sent guys out to retrieve the water, right? But they couldn't really get much. They were taking
No.
fire.
Yeah, no, we wanted it in the compound. It landed outside of the compound out in the open, in the open area between where the orchard was and us. 4 guys volunteered to go out and get it, and they just couldn't get it. They got out there, and then they were just, um, getting shot at, so they had to
Yeah,
abandon the pursuit.
yeah. This is what you call a bad day. I mean, was was anybody killed on the operation? I can't
Nobody
remember.
was killed, just
Yeah,
the
it's
ground force commander was, yeah, I believe he was shot in the leg,
mm,
but when the ambush was initiated by that what I'm guessing was an RPG, um, like, these guys knew what they were doing because they targeted the sort of command group,
yeah,
they could read our formation, if you were standing
yeah,
on top of the hill and you were seeing some folks wedged out, doing the right thing, walking down a hill, you would be like, "Oh, that little cluster right there, that's where the commander is, and I see some
right,
extra radios there," so that's where they put their RPG, and where they concentrated their fire, so he took one in the leg.
man. Yeah, the a buddy of mine always said the enemy gets a vote too. It's like shoot, but yeah. So they got pinned down, taking a lot of fire. Did you ever determine roughly how many enemy fighters you're receiving fire from?
No clue.
But they had belt feds, right?
Uh, yeah, it's so funny. So after I was telling this story, after I got done recording what my memories about it, like I was thinking about it. I never put that much thought into what we were getting shot at with, but
Yeah,
someone asked me the question about um, tracers.
yeah.
They're like, "What's a tracer?" I was like, "Well, a tracer is around. A tracer is a round that illuminates. Is it incendiary? Is it technically an incendiary round?
It technically is.
Yeah,
And there are
it
two forms of incendiary. One is an armor piercing type of incendiary.
yeah,
The other is just to
it
see.
just yeah, it
You
burns. It just
see it. Yeah, it burns. It's like a coating of red, and it burns red. It's just like a big laser going through the air.
yeah.
Yeah,
So and I was explaining that the tracers and when you see it, like I was explaining how well you could have individual tracers, and we would do that sometime. Like back in the day, whether it made sense or not, we'd like put tracers like at the end of our magazine. So
right.
maybe you'd have. Although I've shot plenty of times and it never registered to me that I was like bottoming out on my magazine looking at tracers,
Yeah,
but I was talking about the tracers, and then that's the only time it clicked that like, "Oh, wait, okay, so I mean, I had assumed I was probably getting shot at with belt fed, but it never clicked to me. I thought, maybe it's a belt fed, but the volume of fire that I was seeing everywhere, like, it must have been a few, and it had to have been, like, at least PKM, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
like, some dudes with PKMs were, like, trying to hose down my friends and I, So, like, and that's something that didn't register until I was telling the
Right,
story 15 years later.
right. Yeah, if those of you out there, well, we have belt feds too, and Patrick talked about employing those. It doesn't take too many belt feds to make life real miserable. If you're taking fire, I'll just leave it at that. I wanted to say because I see our time, keeping an eye on our time here. I could go on all day with questions. The, have you ever thought about writing a letter to the Ranger Training department or whatever saying they need to teach the zigzag run from Private Ryan. And I wonder if that, I mean, it does make sense to try to,
I don't want
I,
to. I don't want someone. I don't
yeah,
want that on my conscience that someone
yeah,
hears this and when they're in the great, the
yeah.
great Sino-American War in 2030, like they like I did the zigzag because
And I
that.
zagged when I should have zigged
Yeah,
and I
you
got
zig right
around.
into.
Yeah,
At the moment, in its split seconds,
yeah,
and I'm trying not to like put on 15 years of analysis on top of it. Not that I try to think about it too much,
yeah,
but instinctively I knew that we were subject to like plunging fire, like they had an angle on us. And I
right.
think I just knew that it was fucking stupid if I were to go out and do a 3 to 5 second army rush, right? I'm up,
Right.
they see me, I'm down, and then I lay in the prone. The angle I would, if I did that, I would be like planar to them,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Like I would be exposing more of myself. So I think as instinctively I knew that that would be stupid to do.
right.
And so I don't know. I zigzagged. I don't I literally stood up and I thought about that moment from that movie and I zigzagged. And I don't know if it helped me, probably made me slower. Like I could have
Yeah.
I like you said, I could have zigged and then zagged right into like
Right.
the next like burst of fire.
Right.
I'm just glad it worked out in the end.
Sometimes combat is just like jazz. We just improvise. We don't,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
the training and then the shit hits the fan and then everybody's just doing what they're trying to do to survive.
Yeah.
Well, we're kind of winding down and last question and these are kind of stupid in one sense because hindsight's 2020 and when you start asking was it worth it, it's like, well, whether it was worth it or not, it was the situation as it presented itself. But do you think if you could do it over again, would you have let that squirter go? I mean, was it worth it to get him?
Honestly, I don't know. And I said at the end, when we got back, I was just happy to be back, and I didn't ask a lot of questions, and we went right back to work after this. It's not like we, it's not like we got like mental health time
Right.
after this mission necessarily. Although, and I talked about it in earlier episodes, there were a few missions after that where we got some extra latitude, maybe because command or higher up thought, okay, maybe these dudes are just a little on edge after that.
Yeah.
But we had to go back to work, so we didn't think about it a lot, didn't dwell on it a lot, and hopefully it was worth it. Hopefully that dude knew something or he was a bad guy. I ultimately
Yeah.
don't know.
Well, I'll just leave it with what a mission and at least you didn't lose anybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Most important thing. So
Yep.
I could go on, but great stuff and hope you all got something out of it.
Yeah. Thanks everyone. We'll catch you in the next one.
See you.